Well, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the unveiling of the Marshall Plan, the U.S.-funded program that rebuilt and destroyed Europe after the Second World War. Well, even as a ceremony was held in Berlin to celebrate that anniversary, there are growing calls in the international community asking if the Marshall Plan would now be a useful model for the war-torn Middle East. Senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has more in this report.
70 years ago, Europe in tatters. Millions dead, cities destroyed, governments getting back on their feet. World War II over, but much rebuilding ahead.
We've had to comment several times that we won a victory, but we still have not won a peace.
George Marshall, U.S. Secretary of State, pitching the plan that would bear his name, to fund and lead the rebuilding of the European continent, an investment, as he saw it, in future stability. And now, 70 years later, a continent that, for all its challenges, can boast of democracy from the North Sea to the Black Sea, with a united Berlin, capital of a Germany that is prosperous and free, where on Wednesday, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and American statesman Henry Kissinger took stock of what it all meant.
It was a clarion call of permanent commitment in the construction and maintenance of international order.
The Marshall Plan now a model for many parts of the world, including the Middle East.
Especially if then we have a massive Marshall Plan to rebuild Syria, which is by far going to be cheaper than actually handing millions of refugees coming into Europe or elsewhere.
The parallels are appealing. A destroyed Europe brought back to stability and peace? So too, maybe for the Middle East. But who would pay for that Marshall Plan? And who would take the money? Governments with fragile control of territory? Dictators who might line their pockets? 70 years on, can the success of yesterday really be the model for today? Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
Well, still in the studio with us is Danny Ayalon, Israel's former Deputy Foreign Minister. And joining us is Dr. Amira Halpern, the Associate Researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Truman Institute. President Truman being the president, of course, who initiated the Marshall Plan. So let me ask you, Dr. Halpern, we're seeing now a Middle East ravaged by war, as was Europe after the Second World War. At some point, the battle against ISIS certainly will be over. Nations will have to be rebuilt. Can the Marshall Plan serve as some kind of template in that effort?
It might be serve as some kind of template, but of course we look at the similarities as well as the different issues between the two. When we talk about the Middle East, comparing to Germany following Second World War, we talk about different nations. We talk about unity in Germany, whereas in the Middle East there is division between different religious groups. There are many terror groups that are not speaking with the West at the moment, and the West, of course, is trying to stop radicalization and terrorism, and it is a very difficult thing to do.
Yes, but you do believe that the West should invest in trying to rebuild these societies in a way, again, taking as its inspiration the Marshall Plan?
It should be, yeah, but I mean, of course, there are many things that had to be sorted out, like the peace process. There is no peace in the Middle East, and the terrorist groups, and the division between the Muslims themselves. And of course, we have to remember that the borders are not so clear. It's not a real state inside, but more rather of different ethnic groups. So yeah, of course, it should be taken, but into different considerations should be taken.
Okay. Danny, you have dealt in the real politique, in the real world. Can the Marshall Plan, or even some variation of it, work in the Middle East?
Caleb, the short answer is no. I have the pleasure and honor to watch the original Marshall Plan as it adorns the office of the Secretaries of State in the United States. But it's a totally different issue. It was very ingenious at the time because it landed on a very fertile and receptive ground in Europe. But here it's totally different situation, politically, culturally, economically. And there's one more point important. There is no lack of resources in the Middle East, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. The problem is a political problem, is the divide between Sunni and Shia, the terror, And mostly is because countries here in the Middle East, short of very few, are very artificial countries, and the borders, as we see them today, will not be there tomorrow.
Well, Dr. Halperin, we've raised the question of these, say, artificial countries or destroyed societies, but in a sense, nation building was a part of the Marshall Plan. There were some almost new, they weren't maybe new nations, but they had to almost be built from the ground up. If the West doesn't do it, doesn't that create a vacuum that Saudi Arabia could move in, China can move in? I mean, should not the West step in some way in this effort?
Of course, but they have the problem of the vacuum now. I mean, now we can see that after toppling Saddam Hussein, for example, in Iraq, there was no major change. Following the Arab Spring, we don't see any major change. So we see that the West is trying to fight against it all the time, and there are new measurements all the time, and the President Trump is trying to fight against terrorism, but we don't see it happens in reality, actually.
Mm-hmm. Danny, but yes, go ahead.
One very important point. You know that the Palestinian Authority have received from the West per capita more than the Europeans did through the Marshall Plan. Did it help any Palestinian? No, because...
Well, Danny, let me throw a more positive example to you. People talk about the Kurds, and maybe there might, in a sense, be an effort to create a de facto Kurdistan that the West is part of, and that I dare say Israel may be part of, or certainly is encouraging. Why not find those sectors of the Middle East where there is that potential?
Absolutely. When you talk about specific regions and specific ethnic groups and people who are ready, there is no people, stateless people, that are ready for independence more than the Kurds. We're talking about 35, 40 million Kurds who are ready, compared to this 7, 8, 9 million Palestinians who are not ready, and we know that. Of course, there are the geopolitics, Turkey, Iran, Syria, whatever is left of it, Iraq, whatever is left of it, would all be against it. But I think that would be very, very helpful for stability in the region to have a Kurdistan as an independent state, and certainly it would be a great asset for the Western interests.
Dr. Halperin, of course, the United States, with, in the Marshall Plan, coming the victor of World War II, on the verge of a tremendous domestic economic boom. Do you think there's any even will in the United States, for example, for any even type of nation building similar to what went on in the Marshall Plan?
Sure, I believe so, but I think there's another important point to bear in mind. Trump's situation as a politician, as a new president, he has to deal with other domestic issues, such as domestic issues. So even if he really wants to sort out and to try to negotiate and to promote the peace process, there are many domestic problems with his presidency at the moment that I hope that he will come over, and his people will manage to work on the Middle East initiative. And
okay. Dr. Meir Halperin, Research Fellow at the Truman Institute at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and of course Danny Ayalon, former Deputy Foreign Minister and Israeli Ambassador to the United States. Thanks for being with us.